even if you don't know the term epigenetics yet, chances are you're familiar at least with the general concepts behind genetics, right? When you think of genes, you think of, okay, I'm inheriting something from my mom, something from my dad. The combination of the two are what came together to kind of make me, right? So you've got your family lineage to be mindful of, that family tree on the left. And then on the right, when you think of the outcomes of combining genes, right? This graph or this table here is an example of Mendelian genetics, which is a simplified version of what happens when you combine genes. Basically, when you take a gene from your mom and a gene from your dad and you combine them, you are opening the possibilities and the likelihoods of different expressions of those combinations, right? And genetics, the study of genetics, has kind of been on what do you inherit from your parents? How does your genetic makeup transfer over to your health and your health outcomes? And what are some of the things that influence what genes get expressed and those that don't? So in the very classic sense of the word genetics, you know, think about your mom up top, your dad down bottom. Your mom's red, your dad's blue. They make a baby and it's got one red, one blue, and you turn out purple, right? You're getting a slice of each of your parents that come together to kind of form this new combination of the two. Now, when you think of the combining of the two, right? Traits from your dad, traits from your mom, you know, what are those things that you're inheriting? It could be physical, like bone structure, hair color, height, metabolism, and all different kinds of facets of your physical appearance as well as your health. There are also some cross-generational features. I'm sure some of you have an example in your family of something that you have, your parents don't, but when you look back at old pictures of maybe grandparents, great aunts and uncles, you see it in them. So it's like, oh, it skipped a generation, but it's still here. So there are interesting intricacies within heritable traits and genes. So things to think about. Added layers of complexity that a lot of people kind of breeze by and don't really give too much attention to, because for the longest time we've really considered genes to be more physical and physical appearance related than we have with health. Now that people's health generally is kind of worsening over time, we are now starting to pay a little bit more attention to them and wondering what else is in those genes that is causing all of these negative health outcomes, right? So think about, what are we actually inheriting with those genes? So to expand on that heritability and kind of that combinational approach of genetics, you think about all the qualities that your mom has: brown hair, high cheekbones, she's 5'3", her family's got heart issues, cholesterol issues, stomach issues, whatever it may be. Your dad's got blonde hair, narrow face, 5'11", and then, knee problems and mental health disorders throughout his family, extended family. So when you look at those two, you combine them, and that opens the possibility for you to acquire some, all, in full force, a slighter version of each of them. All options remain possible, but based on your parents' appearance and health outcome is going to determine the likelihood of those things happening for you, right? So dad has blonde hair, mom has brown hair. You may have like strawberry blonde hair, or you may have a light brown hair. You know, maybe you look more like your dad or more like your mom, but you act more like your, you know, the opposite parent. Your height may be in the middle. You may be tall like your dad. You know, plenty of different variations within each of those, you know, kind of extremes of your mom and your dad. And that includes the health risks as well. I'm sure people have told you, or that you've heard, that something runs in your family, right? You know, my great-grandfather, my grandfather, and my dad, they all had cancer, and now that puts me at a higher likelihood of that happening. So epigenetics is a good way of kind of exploring how and why that may be happening. So it begs the question, when you look at the heritability of genes and our current understanding of genes as this blueprint of who we are to become and have and look like, right? Are our genes set in stone? Is it, if you have gene X, you are going to have condition X? If your mom and your dad both have genes for blonde hair, does that mean you're guaranteed to have blonde hair? And is there any way that could change? And I mean, I'm not gonna stand here and confess to know 100% one way or the other, but based on everything that we are learning, one has to consider a certain degree of flexibility or plasticity in maybe not the structure of the genes themselves, but maybe how those genes are being read, right? So if you're looking at this this picture of a hieroglyph here, right? What story does it tell? Well, am I reading up and down? Am I reading right to left, left to right, down to up? Yes, each of these inscriptions implies a possible outcome, right? There's a direction, there's a story with it. How is it being read? How is it being connected with the other genes that are also inscribed? Are some being skipped? Is the fact that they're there automatically mean that they're a part of the story? Or is it, lots of different variables and conditions that we still aren't sure about in terms of how genes are attached to everything in our life? So if there is that flexibility and that plasticity in genetic outcomes, when we are reproducing and having children, what is their state of being from a genetic standpoint? Yes, they have the blueprint of who they are going to be, but what are the factors that actually write their story, right? The idea that, your mom may have cancer and your dad may not like blueberries. You could grow up loving blueberries and not getting cancer, right? So it's like, do you really start kind of with a clean slate, that tabula rasa, or are you bound to your genetic history? And this is where epigenetics comes into play. So epigenetics are things outside of the genes themselves, independent of the structure of the gene, right? So it's not like cutting and clipping and sewing back together parts of the genes. These are things that are, without actually changing the structure of the gene itself, changing the outputs of the genes, right? How those hieroglyphs are being read. And you'll see here in these graphs, I have listed vitamins, minerals, and nutrients. My focus in the epigenetic realm has been from a food and nutrition standpoint, and how those kinds of things are influencing our gene outputs. But it is not just food and nutrition. Environmental stresses, nuclear fallout, that's an extreme example, but radiation, sun exposure. It could be heavy metal contamination, all different kinds, just like life stress and, wartime and famine, what have you, all, throughout our lineage. All of these things have an influence on how our genes start to express. Think about graying hair. When you get stressed and your hair turns gray, is that because you have genes for gray hair? Or is it because the genes for brown hair that you have altered in a way that they're not brown anymore? Food for thought. So here's a good definition of epigenetic inheritance. So the transmission of epigenetic markers and modifications from one generation to multiple subsequent generations without altering the primary structure of the DNA itself. Okay, so altering how things are manifesting and looking and, your health outcomes, but not actually rewriting any of the blueprint coded in your DNA, right? And we'll talk more about what those factors are that play into changing those outcomes. Things like life experiences, traumas, even personal preferences, right? I know in my family, I have a history of artistry. People that are artistically inclined, writers, painters. I've got woodworkers as well, a lot of carpenters in my family. And this goes hundreds of years. So just strange things like that we don't really have a scientific understanding of just yet. So a key point and a good base foundation to move off of from here is the idea that your genes, the hard set in stone blueprint of your being, they are inseparable from the outside environment that the genes are living in, as well as the environment within the cell itself that the DNA is encased in, the environment that the DNA is producing, right? So there's this constant feedback of, okay, what are the instructions in the DNA? Okay, what are the raw materials that DNA is kind of using to create its environment? Within that environment, how is that environment interacting with the outside environment to influence how the genes continue to express, right? So there's this constant feedback loop back and forth between the two. And from an evolutionary standpoint, it makes complete sense, right? We are always interacting with our environment. The more you interact with your environment, the more influence your environment will have on your adaptability, right? So